You're listening to Conversations Along the Way, part of the Stoic Mom Project. At the SMP, we embrace the Stoic principle of the obstacle is the way, or that we can take the hardest things in our lives and use them as a way to learn and grow into the best versions of ourselves. If you're here, you're likely a growth-oriented parent of a young person who's choosing to navigate the world through a trans identity. I'm Stoic Mom, a life coach and educator who is also a growth-oriented parent of an adult trans-identified daughter. I've committed to having guests on this podcast who bring messages of healing. I invite professionals who I believe have expertise that can help you regain solid ground and reframe this circumstance in a way that supports you to learn and grow from it. I also invite other parents who found healthy ways to navigate this destabilizing circumstance, whose stories and strategies may inspire you. Today's guest is one of these parents. I hope you can find value in healing ideas from our conversation. So I'm excited to have you back on and get an update. You mentioned that you have had a dream or had another dream after the dream that you described about the serial killer when you and I spoke the first time. So I am, as my listeners know, a little obsessed with dream work. And so let's jump right in there. And you can share that dream.
Yeah. I'm going to read from my notes because I wrote it down right after.
Before you do, I probably should give a little more context now that I'm thinking about it. So with me is SB. We talked last fall, and she shared a powerful dream in the episode titled "Whether to Wrestle a Serial Killer." And so listeners can go back and listen to that. Were you gonna share your what's it called when you write it up? Your write-up of that one?
Yes. Yeah. I it's in my chicken scratch, so I'll write it into something that's readable.
Okay. If you
My
don't mind,
handwriting,
I'd love to just link that in the show notes,
Yeah.
and then for quick
Yeah.
reference,
Sure. Yeah.
they could look at that and then maybe even
Yes.
pause and read that and then come back to get this follow-up dream. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So in this dream, I'm in a big room. And I'm not sure why I'm there. It might be like an office, like an empty office building. And there are plants. And I'm topless and I feel very exposed.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm noticing all these different plants and I want to make cuttings. But I'm also aware that I don't have a top on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm trying to kind of run inside this building to cover myself up with these leaves, right? Um, and a cleaning man comes in. So, of course, this is like an empty building, and a cleaning man comes in. He looks really menacing and attacks me, and we wrestle. And I think he's going to assault me. We're wrestling, and I know that there are knives in secret cupboards in this room. So I reach in to grab them, and I stab him multiple times, but he doesn't die. Um, and I can really feel the knives going through. Right? I can feel the visceral sensation. So I tried cutting off his hand, which, by the way, I used to. Maybe why this is something I'm dreaming. I used to be a professional cook, and butchery was something I did. So, I think I'm comfortable with this. So I tried cutting his hand off, and it's like cutting through chicken joints, right? So it's that memory of cutting through chicken as a cook. Um, but he's still really strong. And so I start running away. And oftentimes in dreams, when I'm running away, I try to float or fly up. And it's sort of this like running in air and trying to like get some momentum up into the air. So I'm trying to do that from him. But he actually has that power too, which in most of my dreams is unusual. I don't have to the person chasing me doesn't have that power. Um, And then he changes shape, so he becomes thinner, um, and is sort of a different person. And I keep grappling with him and cutting off bits of him. I'm cutting off like arms and feet and calves, his wrists and his tongue, and it
Huh.
has no effect. He becomes almost like a magical creature, in a ancient fairy tale or something. And other people know he's there and they're terrified, but he's mostly looking at me.
Uh-huh.
Um, and my floating and my flying and trying to get higher and higher doesn't get me high enough at first. But then I start to kind of rise, right?
But
But then you
he's
get
in pursuit. Is
he's
that
in
what's
pursuit.
happening?
Yeah, he's
Okay.
in pursuit. So we're kind of grappling and flying up. And I try I managed to get higher, but then he starts to get higher too. But then I was like, maybe he doesn't want to kill me. Um, and I had this recognition of him from the other dream, the
Mm.
figure, the same figure
Mm-hmm.
of as the other dream. Um, and I think I must have woken up after that. So the two things I think I remember I noted here is that I can really feel that the visceralness of cutting through him, and also this alarm that he's not really deterred by um, by me.
He keeps coming.
He keeps coming.
Keeps coming after you. Yeah, I definitely noticed themes from the first dream
Yeah.
as far as the you wrestling with him. Um, Interesting.
Well, and when I was rereading these notes this morning, I read the end of that where he's rising with me, and then I imagine that and maybe I interpret that he's really not trying to kill me.
Okay.
That's something I think in the theme I think that we talking about it resonated um, in this theme of flourishing.
Oh, okay.
So I came in thinking about that before we even talked about it. So um,
Yeah. Okay. So for listeners,
mhm,
yes, we were talking before about making that part of today's conversation
mhm,
is what is human flourishing and what's kind of required to achieve that state. What goes into that? Interesting. Okay. Let's spend a little more time on this dream,
mhm.
if that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, in the first dream, you did wrestle for a bit with this serial killer, and you mentioned he was slippery, and you were that it was unsustainable, is kind of what I remember, that it
Mhm.
was draining you to fight him and try to prevent the destruction he was wreaking, right? Like nobody
Mhm.
else seemed to recognize the damage he was doing, and you were trying to stop him. And then came to a point where you realized you couldn't. It was impossible. And all that was happening was you were getting drained and losing your strength
Yeah.
and basically sacrificing everything for this fight that you couldn't win.
You're right.
Okay. Um, in that dream, you knew he was a serial killer. Is that right? Like
Yeah.
that's okay. So how interesting that this guy is a cleaning guy, like a janitor. Is that,
Right. Yeah.
huh?
He starts out as the cleaning guy. Yeah, but just back to that first dream, I recognized that I couldn't win, but I also didn't feel like it was going to be over. It was just I couldn't win then, right?
Couldn't,
I
okay,
can win in that
okay.
moment, and that I was outgunned and outnumbered, and I just had to walk away, right? I had to get away because the time wasn't then. Um,
Well, and there was this sort of understanding between you and the serial killer,
right,
if
right.
I'm not mistaken. There was a clear relationship by the end
Hmm.
there, where there was
Hmm.
this sort of like, okay,
Hmm.
you leave these guys alone, because there were some old men playing chess or something that you said they were just kind of
Yeah.
chilling over there.
Hmm.
And he was like, okay, like he could do that. And he was continuing to wreak the destruction. And you, okay. So that's a little different interpretation, I think, than we ended with last time, which happens, right? You revisit a dream or you get something different when this is the beauty of recording them, so you can go back and read and get new insight from it. And maybe I just missed it in our first
Well, I
conversation.
guess I would say, I just don't want to kind of convey that I was giving up. It
Uh-huh.
was just a very practical,
Yeah.
realistic solution, right? It wasn't, you know, it felt empowered to give up.
Yes. Well, and I think where we landed was you chose peace.
And I chose, yeah, it was a choice.
Yeah. Yeah. To fight a fight that I can't win right now,
Mm-hmm.
even.
Yeah.
And to choose a different relationship to what was happening. I don't know if that resonates or
Right.
not. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay. And now you're in this building with all these plants. What is that like? Well, how would you make meaning of that? What do the plants represent, do you think?
Well, since my children are older and my daughter, who, is the trans-identified child, has moved away, I have my nurturing is going to plants in my home. So I've been learning how to take cuttings and root them, and I've been somewhat
Propagating the
surprised
plants.
propagating, yeah, and
Mhm.
was surprised that I kind of managed to do some things I never thought I could do with plants. I live in a condo with one one west facing window, so somehow plants, I think, have become this connection of peace and groundedness,
Mhm. Mhm.
um in just a very small way, but I think maybe even more powerful than I thought until now. um and something I could, nurturing and growing and cultivating, just
Yeah.
like I did with my children, or try to do with my children. And, and of course, being topless and this vulnerability of being exposed.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and then having someone come unexpectedly into it at that moment, right? Someone who didn't belong come into that
Mm.
place of peace and vulnerability in that moment.
And another menacing
and
figure.
and more menacing, yes, right, like peace is achievable but not always and not permanent.
Mm. Yeah.
um
Okay. Yeah. I want to relate to that pull toward plants. Yes. I was somebody who never had much success with house plants. And then in the last few years, it almost seems a little bit of an addiction for me. I have this part of my house that I call the jungle, and I very much adore my plants now. Yes. And so I can relate to that. Um, so now we've got this menacing figure messing again with your peace. And I guess I find it interesting too that you're trying to cover yourself with the leaves of the plants, that's what you're using to try to address this exposure and vulnerability. Yes, I'm no expert in dream interpretation. It sounds like you have a relationship with your dreams, a sort of long-standing relationship. Do you feel like you're pretty um, good at sort of extracting the medicine from the dream? Does that make sense?
I feel like they just very often hit me over the head. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's often been a place for me where it's kind of a splash of cold water
Yeah.
when I wake up from a dream, and it's just new glasses into my life, new a new perspective into my life that I hadn't seen before. So I've always, I mean, not always, in my adulthood,
Mm-hmm.
begin to recognize how powerful they are.
Okay. Well, and as you're describing that, I'm thinking of something I've heard Joseph Lee say. So he's one of the
Right.
hosts of the This Jungian Life podcast. Um, and he says nightmares are, oh, I wish I could get his exact words here, pull them up because he's got such a great way of expressing himself. But basically, it's going to be your unconscious or your subconscious's demand to pay attention to something, right? So when you say it feels like it kind of hits you over the head, that's what he would say is the purpose of nightmares, is to hit you over the head, get your
Mm,
attention, right? Like your subconscious wants you to know something, wants you to bring something to consciousness, and that's what a nightmare does.
right. Right.
Yes. And
And I think it's interesting that some of these motifs have been with me since childhood.
mm, can you say
And I'm
more?
st
Yeah.
well, this one of being able to escape by running really
Mm-hmm.
fast, but only being able to float and not really get speed, but you know, constant running and pedaling, and then kind of it carrying me higher and higher slowly. And that was always a motif um, in in my dreams since being a child. So
Does that have meaning to you in the real world? Like, what do you make of that motif?
I've just started to just see it, and I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it, frankly, except that I recognize this extreme energy spent to run away from something.
Mm, mm,
And realizing, I think as I got older that you don't need to run away
uh-huh.
from things.
Interesting. Okay.
And I think, in this, this follow-up dream of the plants and the reconnection with that character,
Hmm. This time you're actually cutting off parts of him.
and cutting off
He's
parts of him,
still
yeah.
coming. Hmm.
And he's still coming, right? So I am grappling with him, and in physical contact with him.
Hmm.
Um, and you mentioned that, there's a relationship, that we have a relationship.
Hmm.
And I think in this dream, this felt like a continuation of that relationship, um, where he's coming up higher and higher with me, but may not want to kill me.
What's driving his pursuit, do you think? What does he want from you?
I don't know if I have the answer to that,
Yeah.
but I think if I'm going to relate it to how I'm living with the reality of my life, the reality of my child, that these dreams have been referencing, that it's going to be with me. I'm going to be, this is my companion in this journey for a long time.
Mm.
Um, and it's not going to kill me,
Hmm.
but it's
Hmm.
going to be constant wrestling.
So I know one thing uh, that we get reminded of in dream school, you know, and even on this Jungian life, I think, and in my Jungian training too, is
Mm,
that these characters in our dreams are represent something in our psyche, right? If you were to venture a guess what this character represents, what might you say that is as a part of you? What is he
mm.
representing?
Well, I think, fear,
Hmm.
um, for sure,
Hmm.
and threat,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
danger.
Hmm. So how interesting that he doesn't want to kill you, but that he's going to be present and you're going to keep wrestling with him. He's going to
Right,
keep showing up.
right.
Hmm. Okay. And so this dream you said just ended with that awareness. Maybe he doesn't want to kill me.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Ooh. Okay.
And maybe I don't have to,
Hmm.
fight so hard, right? Again, it's this effort, this burning effort to escape and to fight and to
Yeah.
use all my weapons
Use
to
all your
pick him up,
weapons and your skills,
and my
right?
skills. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Because you have this skill and
Right.
cooking and
Yes.
butchery even, right?
Right.
That's not something everybody does, and so it's something you have in your toolbox. Hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is bringing up, and can I share that you're a member of the SMP online
Yes.
community? Okay.
Yes.
And I don't know if you've seen this particular thread about the tunnel or, one thing we talk often about in there that is kind of our main guiding principle is the obstacle is the way.
Right.
Meaning, how do we take the hardest things in our lives and use them to build capacity and get stronger and bigger than our problems, right? And that life is going to bring us obstacles. And if we can orient to them in a way um, that we use them to grow, that it's just a different way. It's a different way to move through
Yes.
life. Yes. Rather than running from, like this dream has you doing in a very unsustainable way, right? You can't really even pick up speed, but so many of us will resist the obstacles or try to run from the obstacles,
Right.
but they keep showing up in some form or another. It's like life is going to keep giving us this pattern until we actually learn to move through it instead of try to evade or run away. So I don't know. This dream seems to
Right.
really capture that idea. I don't know. Does that resonate for
Oh,
you?
absolutely. I actually just started reading Adam Grant's relatively new book, Hidden Potential: The Science of Achieving Greater Things.
Mm,
I don't know if you've seen it, um, but I've just into the first maybe 25 pages or so, and he starts with this idea of, you know, the people who do amazing things, greater things, have learned to lean into discomfort,
hmm
to tolerate discomfort.
hmm hmm
And when I think about that, for me, there's an intellectual understanding of that. Yes, yeah, okay,
hmm
great. This is great. You can go on
hmm
Oprah and say these things. It's inspiring. But if I think about it in my body, and I think that's why, the visceralness of these dreams are so important, is when I think about uncomfortable things, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it right now. Like,
Yeah.
I've got to go into forward with my, this crisis with my daughter and other things that make me want to run the other way. And I have to tolerate in my body that to do
hmm
it, right? To
hmm
really feel
hmm
into my body what's happening. Because you can't just think it.
Oh my gosh, it's interesting that you're bringing this up.
Yeah.
Because I have identified, I think, in myself a tendency to what I'm now referring to as the intellectual bypass, right?
Right. Yes.
That if I understand it, if I do enough research and I understand it, then I've kind of done the work, right?
Hmm.
And that's not true. And the difference between knowing and understanding. And so I'm thinking back to my educator days and how there was this sort of model of levels of uh, learning, I guess. And at the bottom was knowing and understanding, and it moved up to judgment, evaluation, but it's interesting now that I think of that knowing as something very different. We can have
Mm,
this intellectual understanding, but if we know it, it's like you said, we have a felt sense. It's in our bodies.
right.
You can talk about a certain type of experience all day long, but until you feel it in your body, um, you don't know it.
Right.
You might understand it, but you don't know it. And so, um, something
Well,
else that I've learned recently is like emotion is what kind of locks us in. It's also what frees us. So basically, the idea that transformation doesn't happen without emotion. Does that
Yes.
make sense?
Yes. Yes. It's, and again, it's that accepting the vulnerability of, that comes with emotion, any emotion. Well, I guess besides anger, rage,
Mm,
um, is that there's the other emotions are about also vulnerability, it brings in vulnerability. Um, but it softens you enough to know it, to know things, right? You have to soften, I think, to know in your body something. And that's
mhm,
what I mean, that's just what I've found through kind of, the crises that personal crises,
mhm,
is to let that emotion soften me enough to know the things that I already intellectually know. Um,
mhm, mhm. You brought up anger and rage, and I've heard somebody recently say that, and I know there are other reasons for anger.
right.
There are legitimate reasons that we need to be able to get mad and use that
Oh,
energy to,
absolutely. Yes.
um, and we can get stuck in anger as a defense.
Right.
And I've heard somebody say, anger is sad's bodyguard. And
Oh, yes. Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
way to defend. It's a way to not get vulnerable because that is really, as you've brought up, uncomfortable. Yeah. Um, in our last conversation, and I would refer people to that conversation because I'm realizing I'd like to move into the flourishing component of
Mm-hmm.
this one. But you spoke a lot about grief. You shared a resource even that helped you. Do you remember the name of the book that you mentioned? It was about how animals even
Oh, Waking the Tiger.
waking the tiger.
All
Okay.
right.
So I've had people asking for resources. Would you recommend that as a good resource for?
I mean, it's not necessarily about, your personal approach to, you know, to vulnerability, but I think for me, just understanding that I'm an animal and
Mhm,
this is what animals do,
mhm,
and
mhm,
accepting that it's just part of our wiring and our DNA
mhm.
to have these responses and to allow and befriend them,
Yes. Well, and
right?
honestly, that is part of flourishing, isn't it?
Yes, yes,
It is that
yes.
it is building that capacity to honor and befriend them and use them as information. I think
And
this
information, exactly.
we have come to label uncomfortable emotions as bad or wrong, I think. When we think they're bad, that equates to wrong, and then we think we shouldn't be having them.
We should have, yeah, we should fix them. And even with anger,
Uh-huh,
right? I learned to
uh-huh,
treat anger as information.
mhm,
I am
mhm,
not in my thinking brain if
mhm,
I'm this angry. I am
mhm.
not in my space to be sensible and to make the wisest decision and to do right by my own values. And I, recently let anger make me live in outside of my values. And I was reminded of that, you
Mm,
know.
mhm.
I may have been right
Do you
in
mind
my
sharing a little bit
perspective.
more about what
Yeah.
happened? Okay.
Well, I have a sibling who just said something that triggered me. It's just sort of like difference of perspective in how the world is right now. And of course, it was like 10:30 at night, so we shouldn't be doing anything like that at 10:30 at night. And I just kind of, texted some like, um, dramatic,
Mhm,
response.
mhm,
And all the while I'm texting, I'm like, I know this is not right. I know, but it's just like I've been overtaken, right?
mm,
And I don't think my point of view was wrong,
mhm,
but I wasn't handling myself in my integrity and in my values and the things I hold. I mean, doing the right thing is hard. And again, this is leaning into that discomfort is
Mm-hmm.
the things we know we should do is hard. It makes us uncomfortable. It stresses us out. It rises, it activates our nervous system, and so it's again being able to kind of sit a little bit with that before you know, try running the other way.
Yeah. Give it some
Give it
space.
some space. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Maybe not act when
yeah.
you're.
Right. Well, in terms of reacting, overreacting,
Hmm.
yes, yeah.
Hmm.
Um, Another way I've heard this is that your brain, in the training I've been doing, your brain wants to go to the path of that uses least energy.
Mm,
And
okay. Hmm.
the least energy is the well-worn path that we have, the
Hmm.
well-worn path of
Hmm.
reaction.
Hmm.
So doing the right thing or the thing that's different from our reactive self, it requires a little bit more energy or maybe a lot more energy. And so for us
Hmm.
to do the right thing, quote unquote, or the thing that we think is correct or we want to be doing or improving,
Hmm.
we have to be almost bolster ourselves for like, this is going to take a little lift. I have to lift something that I'm not used to doing.
Hmm.
Um, it takes more energy, right? It takes the thinking part of the brain that requires more energy.
Yeah. Well, because like you said, it's not the well-worn path. You're
Right.
asking yourself, you're doing something different
Hmm.
and new, and so it's going to take more consciousness too,
Right.
which
And
is
consciousness
effortful.
takes energy. It's effortful.
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
in terms of like
Hmm.
the biology of it and,
Yes.
the emotionality of it.
Yes. Yes.
It's effortful in many ways.
Yes.
And so, if you want to take this in the direction of flourishing, I think that that's the path that I think towards flourishing right now, anyway, in my life, is to know that and to live with that reality.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that to cultivate that ability requires that I really take care of myself
Yes.
in deep ways.
Yes. Yes. Um, so what does that look like? What does it look like to take care of yourself in deep ways?
Well, and one of the first ways I learned to do that is to care for myself as I would want to nurture my children and
Mm.
and and
Hmm.
and nurture them as babies, almost like the way I would have done it as when they were babies, and maybe I fell out of as they got older. But that really just holding something as precious and
Mm. Hmm.
deserving of all the best and all um, the protection you can give it.
Mm. Hmm.
And so I think, and in terms of being someone who tends to give herself a hard time, hold herself to too high of standards, maybe, or to have high expectations of herself, and um, to maybe overlook um, her needs. I think that for me,
Hmm.
that's important, and I think I
Hmm.
don't know if it's necessarily true for everyone, but I think for a lot of moms, um, that is probably true, partially true.
Yeah. Well, I'm hearing that softness that you were talking about earlier, being able to tap into that in order to give yourself compassion,
Yes.
that this is about self-compassion and tenderness for the difficult things that we're experiencing,
Hmm. Yeah.
being a mom in today's world and trying to bring our children, helping them come of age in this
Yeah.
crazy world we live in where they are
Hmm.
resisting that, they're struggling with that. Um,
And I also want to make sure I don't give the impression that anger and rage doesn't exist in me around, um, the world for our children, as a mom. And,
mm, mhm,
um, you know, that I still feel that deeply, not just for my own kids and my kids' friends, but the children in the world. And I'm filled with rage,
Mm, mm-hmm,
or anger, burning anger about that.
mm-hmm,
Um, and that's information that I'm not going to just say, oh, I'm not going to dismiss. That's information about
mm-hmm,
my values and about what I want to see and what I'm going to be acting on
mm-hmm,
and what
mm-hmm,
I hold most dear. So it's not necessarily that I'm going to go, rampaging and again blaming and going going kind of all over the place with it, but it is valuable information. I don't want to give that impression that you're not allowed to feel those
mm-hmm,
things.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so then what do you do with that anger? How do you hold that anger, or how do you uh, give it the space it needs? What do you do with the anger so that the anger doesn't consume you and
Right.
make you unhealthy?
Right. Well, I think it's really important to be with your body when you're feeling anger.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important because you have to let it go through your body before you can do anything.
The only
Um,
way out is through.
the only way,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, the only way
Mm-hmm.
out is through.
Mm-hmm.
And acting from that place has not been terribly productive and also can lead to just burnout and frustration
Mm-hmm.
for me. And so being able to, again, hold it and practicing holding it, or not even holding it, not holding it tight, but letting it do its thing through my body. And again, that's waking the tiger. It's letting it do its thing through your body, have your body reaction, and don't, and resist the urge to blame or to, you know,
Mm-hmm.
to act outward. And we don't always do it well. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but it's just an important skill to develop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think, as to be an adult who can flourish,
Yeah.
because my goal is to be able to flourish in the world and to use my life in a meaningful way for myself and for people in my life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So to that
So
end, I think that skill is so important.
yeah. On the subject of anger, and I agree, right? And I'm hearing again, making space,
Right.
um, using consciousness, changing the relationship potentially with the anger, using it as information.
Hmm.
And anger is a very natural part of the grief process,
Yes.
right? And oftentimes what comes up, I think, for moms is what am I grieving? And I think initially what they think is they're grieving their child. And that can be a little confusing because their
Hmm.
child is still here. And so I do think it's important to get some clarity as to
Yes.
what you're grieving. And what I've come to, and this might not be the case for everybody, for me, it was a couple things. One, it was the relationship I thought I was going to have with
Right.
my daughter, right? I'm not grieving the loss of my child. In fact, I love my relationship with my daughter now, but I had to grieve the relationship, the vision of the relationship that I didn't get in order to appreciate the relationship that we have, right? And to find some creativity in that. I also had to grieve, and this one might have been bigger, the control I thought I had, right? I think I had this illusion of control, and this blew that to bits.
Hmm.
This experience drove home how little control I have. And that's what I had to grieve
Mm.
and come to acceptance about in order to be able to flourish on the other side of that. Like to me,
Yeah.
that was the obstacle I had to wrestle with, like this character in your dream and learn from, not to become victorious over, not to
Right.
win the wrestling match, but to develop my capacity to be in a world that I can't control
Yes. Yes.
and not
That's
have that eat me alive. Right. Mm-hmm.
yes. And for me, that I don't think I necessarily felt like I had control over my daughter because she already showed this incredible independence and desire to be her own person just very early on. So I sort of had this realization, she's really going to do her own thing. I have like maybe 5 things I can kind of manage to get her to do, and then she's doing everything else in her own terms. But I still had to grieve, and I'm still grieving. I think I remember, for my first child, looking at her and saying, I'm going to make sure everything
Mm-hmm.
good happens, that you
Mm-hmm.
can be, you know, who you are in this world, and you can achieve, your beautiful potential. And the pureness I saw in her was just going to always, I was just going to hold it, and it's going to be brought into the world. And that I had to have to watch her go through the pain of the world just
Yeah.
like everybody else.
Yeah. Yes.
Um, and all I can do is, hold her from afar, hold her when I'm with her as she does that on her own terms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I still am trying to, because she's only 19, I still have some influence. And so I try to set up boundaries where they feel appropriate. Um, but, you know, just knowing that I have to watch her live her life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just like I got to live my life at that age, and of course I wasn't living in a world that she is now, but I want to respect she has the right to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She doesn't think I'm respecting it in terms of how I view her choices, but I am very much, for me to still love her, I have to respect her stage of life and her right to live it.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to know to truly believe it's a wrong choice. I mean, I as a parent, right? But that's not my place now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have pictures, and to grieve that what I thought about that little girl. I look at that picture and I'm like, I thought this about this little girl, and I have to grieve that that's not where
Mm-hmm.
she is now. She's changed, just like
Mm-hmm.
we all did.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I think every day, I think that's why I have pictures of her around, and I look at them and I say, yes, that was a lovely child that she was a lovely
Yeah.
12-year old, and it was wonderful having her as a 5-year-old, or as, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and to just grieve those stages that I remember, and remember them with love and fondness.
Mm-hmm. Because they happened.
They
Those are real,
happened.
you know, you
Yeah.
you had those beautiful experiences with your child and those don't go away. Yeah. I'm excited to share that this episode of Conversations Along the Way is sponsored by Dream School, which is brought to you by the same 3 psychoanalysts who bring you the podcast This Jungian Life. For those who may not know, Lisa Marciano, author of the book Motherhood and one of the founders of Therapy First, is also one of the co-hosts of This Jungian Life. Those who've been following the Stoic Mom Project since its early days in the spring of 2022 know that this Jungian Life podcast inspired me to start paying attention to the symbolism and meaning in my dreams. As a result, around my daughter's 18th birthday, I had a series of dreams that brought me much comfort and peace around trusting both her journey and the foundation we have provided her. I've continued to spend time pondering my dreams and researching the symbols that appear and basically just hoping that I'm, air quotes, doing it right. I finally gave myself the gift of Dream School last fall and can already say it's inspired huge transformation in my life. It quickly deepened my appreciation for the wisdom my dreams offer me and increased my drive to learn more about Jungian philosophy and how I can use it to strengthen my coaching skill set. So not only do you learn how to, as they say, decode the language of metaphor and symbol and harness the power of your unconscious wisdom, if you engage fully in Dream School, you'll learn quite a bit about Jung's ideas around human development over the lifespan, including his concept of individuation, a process that we're all invited to do in midlife that, well, adds more life to the rest of our lives. I could go on and on about the value of consciously engaging in our own midlife individuation process, but I'll save that for my posts on the Stoic Mom Project and my work in helping clients navigate their own unique individuation journey. If you're interested in Dream School and what it might inspire in you, you can use the code STOICMOM15 at checkout for 15% off Dream School tuition. That's Stoic Mom in all caps, followed by the digits 15. Now let's get back to that conversation. I know listeners love to get updates on how our kids are doing. Do you mind sharing how your girl's doing?
Yeah, so she's a first term, started her first term at university.
Mm.
Um, and I'm basically gave her a sort of an ultimatum.
Mm.
I played a little chicken, because it could have gone many different ways, and I don't know which way it'll go, next term. But I said, listen, it's first of all, it's a huge stretch for me. I'm the only one contributing to her education.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm going to really stretch myself financially,
Mm-hmm.
because I believe in your potential, because she said she wanted to get a
Mm.
mastectomy. And I said, if that's the path you want to go on, I can't comfortably contribute to a 4-year university. Um, you might just want to go to community college if you're going to treat school without the seriousness it requires, like a university. That it requires, you're not just paying for classes, you're paying for a whole experience. And to me, right, also worrying about transitioning and medical stuff and serious surgery and putting that in your life intentionally while you are a college student feels like self-sabotage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I felt strongly about that, knowing my child and health issues in general and struggles with focus and commitment to, consistency, regardless if it was mastectomy, if, any other elective kind of serious procedure, intentionally doing it while you're a student
Mm-hmm.
felt foolish and sabotaging. So
Mm-hmm.
I said,
Mm-hmm.
I won't pay for it. For me to agree to pay for school,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have to wait. And I also said, I'm going to work on being able to accept or be able to handle, I don't know if accept, handle this choice you want to make.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that if after you're done with school and I feel like you're on a path to independence, financial independence and professional, growth, it can happen on my health insurance. I can lend some level of care. I don't know, I
Mm-hmm.
haven't defined that yet, but I can lend some
Mm-hmm.
level of understanding and care. Not acceptance, but
Yeah.
care. And I want to be able to do that. And I want to be able to love and support you, even though we disagree with this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm hoping through that time, that's what can happen.
So you're
Um,
able to kind of kick the can down the
Kick
road.
the can down the road a little bit. I think she's strong-headed, and unless she finds a whole new world out there through school, she's gonna do it.
Mm.
But I think for me, my priority and what I'm focused on is I want her to get an education.
Mm-hmm.
I want her to
Yeah.
have the skills for her life. She thinks she's got it figured out. And if I can make sure that she has this education. Um, that's all I can do. That's where I have power.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
and everything else is sort of, you know,
hmm hmm
and that's where I have I've taken the responsibility to make sure she can have the education she
hmm
needs.
Yeah, it was a
Um,
logical
it was a logical one, right?
argument.
Um, yeah. So,
Sensible.
so
And it sounds like
right.
she did, you know, did she accept that? I mean, it sounds like
She
she's, at least for
very
now.
begrudgingly, hostily accepted it, and even told
Okay.
me, I considered, shutting you out, or
Mm,
you know, what do you alienating, and I forgot what word she used,
like estranging,
exchanging, right?
cut
And
you
of
off.
course, she, her peers, her friends, and even some of their friends' moms probably, who are affirming, were affirming her, validating her, you know,
hmm It is a
um,
risky move, and
it is a risky
I've heard
move.
it going that way
Yes.
for parents who've
I had
chosen
to
that. Yeah.
really know my child. I had to
Yes.
really know my
And
child
I think
and
know how
know
to frame
enough,
it. Uh-huh.
and you know enough about the relationship.
Uh-huh.
And I
Uh-huh.
think, what allowed me to get away with it is that when I saw her dabbling in kind of queer stuff, queer theory, and just also, her emerging mental illness, I pivoted and I worked really hard, despite all of her rages and all of her um, irrationality and, immaturity. Worked really hard to try to maintain a connection, to show up and to not run the other way when her
Mm.
rages were too much, or that she was being insane, from
Yeah.
my point of view, and
Yeah.
had to, like,
Yeah.
really just take that take that like take that trigger and just not act on the triggering. It was so triggering to hear
Yes.
this child
Yes.
raging at you and to accuse you and to just
So
constant.
I'm hearing the opportunity to practice what you were talking about earlier, right?
Yeah.
Like we want to react in that same rage.
She was my
That's
tever for this, I
uh-huh.
think.
Uh-huh.
It's like
Uh-huh.
sitting, knowing I loved her, and I wasn't ever going to, I made the choice never to reject her.
Yeah.
And so, and maybe she is this figure in my dream, right? I'm going to carry her with me, and it's going to be
Mm.
this battle
Mhm.
always, right?
Mhm.
And so I had to really sit with all the big feelings that would come up from these
Mhm.
interactions,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
remember what my values, my priorities were for her,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
just keep repeating them to myself.
Yes. So I've been doing a series of podcasts with Rose, called Attachment Matters, and we're talking about the Neufeld
Mm,
model of attachment.
yeah.
And that's what I hear you doing is as the mom, ensuring she knows she can't push you away. You know,
Right.
that and what Rose brings up, she tells a story that is actually Dr. Neufeld's story that we don't necessarily know how they're perceiving it. It feels to us like they're pushing us away, but
Hmm.
that's often not their perception. If we allow them to push us away, what they receive is you left me.
Right. You, it's valid. You didn't care. You don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my daughter, definitely, that is the construct in her head. It's just looking for a
Mhm.
reason for
Yes.
somebody not to care about her,
Trying to make that story true,
trying to make it
even.
true. And she's,
Yes.
yeah. And in fact, I think when we had this discussion recently about her surgery, you know, that was actively at play. She was trying to put words in my mouth
hmm
to say,
hmm
"Oh, you don't care about me. You don't honor me. You don't respect me. You want
hmm
me to die." All of these things, right? You want me to, suffer. And as I realized that in the moment, and
hmm
I made the choice to lean in with, "I love you. I love you, and I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to go anywhere. she got overwhelmed. I think she got emotionally,
Mm.
something popped a little bit. I mean, not
Like
permanently, but
softened?
something softened. And
Okay.
I think almost that it made her afraid. Her wall went down and made her a little bit afraid. And she then like was like, I gotta go, because I think
You broke through the
there
defenses,
was a mix of anger, but also
vulnerability.
vulnerability. And she kind of grabbed her bag and ran out the door of my apartment.
Mhm,
And I was like,
mhm,
okay. And then I ran after her
mhm,
and I said, I'm not going, and it was this dramatic moment. I'm not
mhm,
going anywhere. I love you and I love you, and I'm not going to go anywhere. And
mhm,
no matter where you go, I'm going to be your mom and I'm going to look out for you.
mhm.
And I left. I wanted her to know that. And I don't care if it's, sounds falls flat on her ears, if it doesn't stick right now.
That's what you have,
I
though.
have, that's all
You
I
say
have.
that out of integrity. Yes. And that's what you did there in Neufeld terminology, sound like Rose right now, is called bridging, right?
Hmm.
Is letting her know whatever distance separation happens, you're always there. She can always come back. You're
Yeah.
always there. And they do need that. They need
Yeah.
that. And I do think that they are being encouraged to cut that off. And
Yeah.
if they can succeed in that, I think it makes it easier to,
Yes. Yes.
right. If they can convince themselves we really don't care and we really
Yeah.
um, are against them, you know,
Yes.
that's that's their way
Yes.
of giving themselves permission or making that pathway, I think, more.
Less conflicted,
Yes, well said.
then they can
Yes.
resolve the conflict. I
Yes.
think they're carrying inner conflict about whether this is
Yeah.
the right, or
Yeah.
right path for them.
Yeah.
So I feel like my job is to make sure there's friction
Mhm.
in the, not in our relation, but friction for her, enough friction in terms of, whether this transition is a good idea. Like, I'm going to put the friction in. Everyone else is kind of telling you it's smooth sailing and it's okay and it's going to be great. And I'm going to be putting that sandpaper or sand in your cogs, right? But I'm not
And
going anywhere.
you're doing it in a way though that it's, and I think this is where the conflict comes, is you're on her side.
I'm on her side. Yeah.
She's trying to make you the opposition, but in your careful languaging, right? And your ability to put some space around the anger and not spiral with her,
Yes.
you
Yes.
know, you are you are showing up and saying, I can do this beside you, right? I'm not saying that quite right, but you're on her
I'm
side.
on her. Yeah.
You're, you're making it difficult for her to believe the story that you're the opposition.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and in fact, that I wrote her a letter when I sort of, wanted to make it clear that I wasn't going to make pay for school if this is what she wanted to do while she was in school. And I said, because I want to support you to be a flourishing adult.
Mm,
I
mhm.
know you're going to be a wonderful adult and you're going to flourish, and the things you need to flourish are going to come to you. Um, and I want to make that happen because I know enough about how that can happen. I know,
Yeah.
I know that there's ways for that to happen, and I want
Yes.
to bring those opportunities to you. And so I wanted to speak to the recognition that she wants to be an adult. She
Yes.
wants to grow and she wants to flourish too. And
Yes.
so I
Yes.
didn't want to make it sound like I'm shutting down. I wanted to make it sound like I'm opening up. I want to make the world
Yes.
open up to you, help you open up, your opportunities. Um,
Yeah.
and one of the, and you also mentioned this. story and not validating the story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at a young age, I think I noticed that story, and I realized how much she wanted to pull me into that story,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
how important it is not to take the bait,
Mm-hmm.
not to play that role,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what she wants, because that's control and power in the situation.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I guess, that's something I would tell other moms is you don't have to believe their story. I think there's also a pull to like, why, what am I wrong? I don't want to say no to you. I want to honor your truth, but you don't have to believe their story. You can hold their story and recognize it as their story.
Mm-hmm.
And they also want you to participate in the story in the way that works for them. You don't have to participate in that way.
That, yeah, that was my MO,
Right.
and it wasn't just the trans story. It was the
Right.
story of I'm weak, I'm oppressed. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I knew I could hold a different powerful story, like difficult for her to resist even. It's this interpersonal expectancy effect, right?
Right.
That's sort of,
Right.
that if I continue to treat her like a functioning, capable,
Right.
resilient person,
Right.
speak to her like that's who she is,
Right.
and treat her as such, she almost can't help herself. She has to live into that at least a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and that as moms, there is power in that. It's not controlling, but it is, I would say it is a little manipulative, but it's manipulating for good, right? Because they do want to flourish. That's
But
the
I
other
think it's
piece of this.
modeling. It's
Yes.
modeling. That's what we're supposed to do.
Yes. Yes.
We're setting a template,
Yes.
and we're
And
supposed to do that,
inviting them into it. We are
inviting
in
them into
that
it.
is an
Yeah.
invitation to be a flourishing human being, which they do want.
Yes.
Even if they don't have the words for that, or they can't quite wrap their head around that. It's not a conscious thing, but that's embedded in every one of us. We want to flourish. It's just all these circumstances come along to give us this different story of ourselves and to make us scared, right?
Right.
To def- to make us defended against um, owning that capacity. I think it's a little intimidating in
Right.
this world.
Right.
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
And I think, in terms of this idea, I think that I mentioned about the discomfort that it takes to really achieve and flourish,
Hmm.
and to go, to meet your potential.
Hmm.
Um, I see this path for my child as a way to step away from the discomfort, because it offers like an answer,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
and it offers an identity, and it offers a story that makes all their real discomforts, kind of gives an answer to them.
Hmm.
Um, and so a big part of me sees this story that my daughter carries around her trans identity as a way to manage all that uncertainty.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I would agree. And I guess I would say this is her obstacle. And I think oftentimes we're trying to they are seized, right? They are seized by what is demanded of them to
Mm,
move from a child into adulthood.
yeah.
And we don't have the best resources to help them with that anymore,
Yeah.
and so they've also got to move through it, and some will move a little deeper into like
Hmm.
their tunnel is going to be a little bit longer or a
Hmm.
little bit more treacherous, and they still have to move through, right?
Right.
They've got to deal with whatever gripped them in the first place.
Yes.
So,
Right. I mean, I'm part of me is, I'm like, I can't wait to talk to these people in 10 years.
you know, yeah,
This is going to be
yeah,
so much to learn.
yeah. And I take a lot of hope in the detransitioners, that have come
Yes.
out the other side so stinking wise and
Yes.
authentic, and they know who they are at probably a much younger age than a lot of us who never
Yeah.
grow up.
Yeah.
You
No,
know?
absolutely. Yeah. I've been struck by how much self-knowledge and wisdom
Mhm,
they
mhm,
carry.
mhm, mhm. And I can relate to your stories of your daughter's fierce independence. My
Yes.
kid, my husband said that just last night about my daughter, she's so stubborn. I'm like, determined.
Hmm.
Like she's gonna do things
Yeah.
her way. She's gonna learn the hard way. It was always gonna be her way.
I think that extending of trust is huge. And uh, you know, I realized that I didn't extend trust to my child as they were growing because they were so unstable.
Mm,
And she was so unstable, and I was always like, oh, I can't trust her to do everything I think, and sort of like have
mhm, mhm.
my hands around, just like is,
There's got to be a container.
yeah,
Yes,
I have
yes.
to make a
Mhm.
container. She needed a container, but it's like I also my energy was like, is she gonna screw this up? Or is she gonna
Yeah.
handle this? I mean, she could do amazing things, and sometimes she could just, drop the ball. And now is this period where I have to show her and demonstrate trust in a way that almost puts her on the hook for her own life.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Like, you're
Yes.
on the hook. This is not gonna affect me as much as going to affect you, you know, and it's almost like you've got the keys, and are you are you sure this is
Mm-hmm.
right? This
Mm-hmm.
is this is this
Mm-hmm.
is not, smooth sailing. You've
Mm-hmm.
got a lot of responsibility for how to live your
Mm-hmm.
life.
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. Yes. Yeah.
And so to me, trust is
Mm-hmm.
is I trust you to manage your life, and you
Yes.
have this responsibility now for yourself.
Yes.
It's a
Hey,
great responsibility for
it's a
yourself.
great, yes. Well, and I think the difficulty for moms is being able to tolerate
Yes.
the pain that we can foresee in their choices. It's so messy and uncomfortable for us, and we don't want them to have to go through it. And unfortunately, they do. There's a lot of it is painful to grow up.
Yeah.
There's no way around that. It's painful to grow up. And that's hard for us, I think, as moms. So that's part of our flourishing, isn't it? Is building our capacity to tolerate the pain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm going to plug the community because I do think that, I mean, that's the focus in there. That is our focus.
Right.
How do we resource ourselves to tolerate what this looks and feels like? How do we build our capacity for our children's painful transition? That that's the only word, right?
Right.
From childhood into adulthood, you know.
And that's what we want them to be able to do for themselves. I mean,
Yes.
that's their path out of this, or into
Hmm.
a place where I want to see her be is to be able to get good at that, or get good enough at that, because that's what it's going to take.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you brought up modeling. It's important to model moving through difficult things and learning from them. Yes, that's how they learn to do it is by watching us. So
Yeah.
you and I have been brainstorming, playing around with the idea of a dream group within the community. So kind of, I think, waiting for there to be enough interest in that. But I think that could be a really rich little mini community
Yeah.
within the SMP. So, and then, you know, the community is also attracting, I think, lots of moms who are very consciously building this capacity, like
Mm.
seeking expertise in fields that are supportive for ourselves and each other, and the community is also becoming a place where moms can share that expertise. And we've got an amazing group of moms in there that are coaches and, both life coaches, health coaches. You've been pursuing some coach training, is that correct?
Yeah.
And finding that really supportive. So I just want to really drive home what an amazing community we've got going in there. So we're super glad that you're part of it. Thank you for being
Thank
in
you.
there with
Thank you
us.
for creating it and sustaining it.
Mm. I hope it keeps growing, and I hope more and more moms choose to develop this capacity and model it, yeah, for their kids, because we can do this. We can hold this other story and be beside them as they grow up, as they move through the pain of growing up. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for taking time on a weekend morning to have this
Absolutely. I'm grateful for our chat.
session. Yeah, me too. I'm grateful for you. Thank you.
Okay.
You've been listening to Conversations Along the Way, part of the Stoic Mom Project. If you're interested in connecting with other moms who are seeking to resource themselves and support each other to grow through the most difficult things life will throw at us, we invite you to consider joining us in the SMP Online Community Center. This is a private, vetted community created specifically for moms who share this circumstance. For more information and to express interest in joining, please visit the SMP Community Center tab at stoicmom.substack.com to learn more, or simply fill out the application included in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and always remember, humans have amazing capacity for overcoming adversity and healing. And I'm pretty sure you're human.